It's Kenny! Howdy there, folks. One of my top favorite horror movie franchise monsters, besides Freddy and the Leprechaun, has gotta be Jason Voorhees. Ah, yeah, Jason fucking Voorhees. His Friday the 13th series has spanned 10 original films, a reboot, a crossover with Freddy, numerous comic book spin-offs, and of course, merchandise.
Whoa, Kenny. Sorry to interrupt you, but you forgot to mention that it created one of the best songs in the world. Like this. No, not that one. This one. Yeah, that's sweet. Anyway, continue.
I would absolutely be thrilled if I could review every Jason film in their entirety for y'all, but that's gonna have to wait a while. Anyway, Jason Voorhees has also appeared in video games, but possibly his most infamous video game incarnation was in the NES Friday the 13th title.
Both redneck, and I wish we didn't have to call it infamous because, spoiler alert, this game is gonna suck.
He's right. Part of the reason is because this is an LJN published game. Come to think of it, it's been a minute since we've reviewed a game from LJN. The last time I done one was for Back to the Future a few years ago. Anyway, let's dive into the history of this game's development and the dreadful reception thereafter. Like most of LJN's games, Friday the 13th was not actually developed by LJN. Instead, they outsourced the job to another company. While doing my research, I was fucking floored when I discovered that it was Atlus who developed Friday the 13th. Yeah, Atlus. As in Shin Megami Tensei Atlus. Speaking of, Atlus was quite busy with their digital devil story Megami Tensei 2 title when LJN came knocking. Because of that, lots of corners had to be cut for Friday the 13th. Atlus was simply working on something that, in the long run, needed more of their attention. The game would be released in late February 1989, and from there, it would receive numerous scathing reviews from nearly every gaming magazine at the time. GamePro listed it as the number 10 worst movie-based game, EGM listed it as the number 8 worst console game, and Nintendo Power listed it as the number 6 worst NES game. Bottom line, Friday the 13th was a massive critical failure, and for most gamers, it was just another shining example of shitty movie-based games. To be honest with y'all, I really wish this wasn't the first Jason or Atlus thing I was reviewing. Truth be told, I'd rather review the first Friday film or Megami Tensei The Old Testament. Oh well, let's start 'em up.
Prepare for pain.
When you press start, you're taken to a screen that shows the map of Crystal Lake, plus the 6 characters you can play as. You can basically think of these characters as physical representations of your extra lives, cause, well, there are no 1-ups in this game. You have 6 chances to do what you gotta do, and if your last guy is killed, it's game over. That, however, is just one way to get a game over. Another way to get one is if Jason kills all the kids in the camp. This leads me to the very first problem with Friday the 13th. It's hella confusing for first-time players. In short, it's a what the fuck do I do kind of game. In fact, while I was getting footage, I looked up both a written and a video walkthrough for this game. Here's the objective. You pretty much just run around the map, killing a random number of enemies until eventually you find a lighter. From there, you go into the big cabins and try to light all their fireplaces, whilst also trying to fend off Jason from both your friends and the kids. While you do that, you also have to look for more powerful weapons to kill Jason. Speaking of, you must slowly but surely whittle down Jason's health to 0 3 times before you beat the game. And if y'all are wondering, no, the ending is not worth all that bullshit you have to do in order to win. In fact, look at Jason. He doesn't look dead. He just looks tired and sick of it all.
much like how you'd feel after playing this game.
I'm sure that Friday the 13th's manual explained in better detail what the hell you were supposed to do, but how did Atlas and LJN expect the general gaming public to not ignore the manual's existence entirely?
That's right. For instance, most of the younger gamers back in 1989 were more likely to chuck the manual and box in the trash.
I want to mention this one tidbit about the game because I think it's worth noting. It's loosely based on the second Jason film.
Well, that's at least one positive thing I can bring up about Friday the 13th. It kinda sorta takes place in Friday 2's setting, which is admittedly pretty cool. For those that don't know, Jason didn't become the franchise's main monster until the second film. His mother, Pamela, was actually the original killer. Spoilers, she ended up having her head lopped off at the end of Friday 1, and during the events of the second movie, Jason ended up enshrining her head. This, unfortunately, leads me to another negative aspect about this game: the enemies. Besides Jason and Pamela's severed head, all of the enemies in Friday the 13th are zombies, demonic birds, and wolves. None of those were in any of the Jason films. I know this because I've watched all those films many times. The closest thing we got, in terms of like a zombie for example, was in the 9th Friday movie, Jason Goes to Hell. However, that movie was released a whole 4 years after this game, and the zombies, if you could even call them that, were just corpses possessed by Jason's spirit.
It may sound like a nitpick, but this isn't Castlevania, it's fucking Friday the 13th. Those monsters do not belong in there. It's the equivalent of putting those same monsters in a game based off the Halloween or Texas Chainsaw series.
Right? Also, if Atlas and LJN absolutely had to put those enemies in the game, then why did they make it survival horror?
Because of the monsters I've come across, I can't help but feel that this game would have done a lot better had they'd have made it a hack-and-slash adventure like Ninja Gaiden. Unless we're talking about Sweet Home for the Famicom, there wasn't really any survival horror titles to be had during the third generation. There's a reason for that, though. It all has to do with tech. The tech back in 1989 was virtually incapable of producing anything objectively good. Hell, it wouldn't be until the fourth generation, with the advent of Alone in the Dark and Clock Tower, when folks actually got legitimate survival horror games. What makes Alone in the Dark and Clock Tower better than Friday the 13th, besides being made better, is the fact that those are actually pretty damn scary. There is nothing even remotely scary in this game. Nothing! Not even Jason's random attacks. Now, isn't that a crying shame? A survival horror game based off a horror movie franchise, and they couldn't even make it scary. Y'all want to know something? That doesn't piss me off. It disappoints the shit out of me. I understand that the devs were working on a better game whilst also working on this crap, but that's the whole reason LJN should have never went to Atlas to begin with. If anything, LJN should have gone to Tecmo. It would have been a win-win scenario had that have played out. LJN would have had a decent game and would have turned a profit for once, and Tecmo would have been able to get around Nintendo's then asshole licensing policy.
In short, LJN should have planned ahead for everything before going off half-baked with, possibly, no set goal in mind. Of course, we are talking about LJN here. As AVGN would probably say, all this company did was joke, and cheat, and make shitty games, and that was it.
Oh yeah, I remember AVGN saying that when he reviewed Jaws. Yet another LJN game. Anyway, I said a minute ago, Jason attacks randomly.
In fact, his attacks are so random, they're sure to catch a first-timer off guard at least a couple times. And I'm not talking about how he attacks the kids or the other player characters, I'm talking about how he attacks you. When Jason is about to kill one of the counselors or the kids, a beeping sound will alert you, and you need to get to the corresponding cabin. Once you get to said cabin, you go in and you look for Jason, and he can literally be anywhere, save except for when you first go in. After finding Jason, you immediately enter into a punch-out style fight with him. If you manage to get his health down enough, Jason runs away and you can continue playing as normal. It should be known, however, that after fighting Jason in a cabin, he'll sometimes come back for more outside. Actually, he can randomly attack outside too, and that's just as infrequent as when he's going after a counselor or the kids. Jason's also a little more difficult to handle when you're outside as well. He takes about the same amount of hits as he would in a cabin, but dodging his attacks is a lot more tricky. I managed to get through most of these retarded battles, sure, but I also got my ass handed to me a few times. I feel like LJN and Atlas should have given players an option to run away from Jason.
Friday the 13th is supposed to be a survival horror game, after all. That's the whole point of most survival horror games. To fucking survive.
Redneck's got a point. Had the developers gave players an option to sometimes run from Jason rather than always having to fight him, that would have been revolutionary. Think of Resident Evil 3 before Resident Evil 3 ever existed.
While we're still on the subject of the Jason battles, you must deplete all his hit points before moving on to the next level.
I mentioned it briefly at the beginning, but let me go into greater detail. There are 3 weapons in the game, which help you not only take out normal enemies, but also Jason. I should note that every player has to find these things individually. Yeah, items don't transfer. The first weapon that every player starts with is a rock, and it sucks because it's super weak and it arcs when it's thrown. Seriously, I had to duck sometimes to use this weapon properly. The second weapon, and the one you should try to get as fast as possible, is the knife. The knife may not seem that strong, but it's worlds better than the rock. The third and best weapon is the torch. This weapon is awarded to you after lighting all the big cabin's fireplaces. You really want the torch because not only will it kill the monsters in one hit, it's super effective on Jason. Technically, there is a 4th weapon in the game, a pitchfork. Yet another callback to Friday 2. But you gotta go through a lot of bullfuckery just to get that weapon.
The game should count its lucky stars that we're even mentioning the damn thing. This little shitbit here is a point of contention for me, though. Not being able to transfer items with the other characters is ridiculous. In Sweet Home you could do it, so why not in Friday the 13th? It's absurd as fuck.
Y'all have probably figured it out by now that this game is very repetitious.
I want to go on record here and say that repetition in video games isn't necessarily a bad thing. In fact, repetition can be good for a game. Take Megami Tensei, or shit, the entire turn-based RPG genre for that matter. In those, you fight enemies, gain stats and items, rinse repeat. I love playing those games despite their repetitious nature. But y'all gotta remember, games like Megami Tensei also have bitchin'-ass stories and, usually, gamer-friendly features. On the other hand, in Friday the 13th, you walk around and fight monsters that barely give you any items, look after or otherwise babysit the other counselors plus the kids, light a bunch of stupid fireplaces, fight Jason, look for better weapons, switch characters so that they can do the same, and fight Jason some more. I'm seriously at wit's end with this one, folks. I gotta turn this fucking game off.
Other than being somewhat based off of one of my favorite movies in the Friday series, there ain't much else that's good about this game.
I could mention that the graphics are nice, and they are, but it doesn't count because Friday the 13th sucks at the end of the day. I will give credit where credit is due, though. About the only real positive thing I actually found in this game is that it was kind of a forerunner for survival horror. Now, mind you, that title rightfully belongs to Sweet Home, but that game never came to North America until years later, and even then, fans had to translate it, because Capcom never did. Still haven't. So it is possible, unlikely, but possible, that without Friday the 13th, Infogrames probably wouldn't have developed Alone in the Dark, which means Human Entertainment probably wouldn't have developed Clock Tower, which means Capcom probably wouldn't have developed Resident Evil. Probably. But seriously, the fact that Friday the 13th is a survival horror precursor might be its silver lining. You gotta crawl before you walk, and while this game definitely crawled, it did so for the benefit of its genre. Friday the 13th is also an old game, about as old as me, and therefore I try to give it some leeway because technology back then wasn't sophisticated enough yet. Perhaps Atlas shouldn't have attempted a survival horror game at all, but if they hadn't have, who would have?
I still don't recommend this game to anyone. In fact, I'm giving it a T for terrible. It's poorly designed, and it's repetitious in the worst possible fucking ways. However, Shasta and I can at least admire it for doing something that not many other games were even attempting to do at the time. Well, Shasta, what's your take on Friday the 13th for the NES?
If it smells like a turd and plays like a turd, then a turd it must be. The gameplay is full-on garbage, and its repetitive nature means that even if you cheat to win, you're still gonna have a long and boring experience ahead of you. It's totally an LJN game, that's for damn sure. In the words of the immortal Dylan Tomasi, Friday the 13th for the NES was a movie-licensed cash grab. It was more than likely made just to fill a quota. I look on the bright side though, and try to see the game for what it brought to the table. Atlas was trying something new, and this new thing was still in its early infancy. If Atlas had not have even tried, who's to say that the genre would have taken off in the future?
And with that, me and this old hound dog call it a day. Until the next review, farewell for now, folks.